Hi, my name's Justin Shelf and I'm the engineering lead at PatchMyPC. We develop a third-party patch management solution for Microsoft SCCM. Prior to my current role, I was also a premier field engineer at Microsoft supporting SCCM. In this video, I'm going to be covering the fundamentals around software updates in SCCM. I'm actually going to cover a lot of the processes that I would use and the structure that I would use when I would go on sites to different customers when I was a PFE for Microsoft. So hopefully this might be helpful for you. This will be great for beginners if you haven't started using software updates. And it might also be helpful for those of you who are experienced to give you more information, for example, about how we can do things like organizing our collections and maintenance windows so we can make use of ADRs for staging our updates out in a way that will work very well. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This does assume that you have a software update point installed within your site. So we'll go quickly review some of the settings that I have going on. If you don't have that, I'll link out in the description and the accompanying blog post to a video that we did that describes installing the software update point. So what we've got here, we're synchronizing from Microsoft updates. So that's always going to synchronize our WSUS catalog with what is available from the Microsoft update catalog whenever we perform a synchronization. The next thing that I'm going to show you is my classifications. So in our lab, we're doing pretty much everything except feature updates and tools. So this can just vary based on what you need. Just make sure that you double check what your classifications are to make sure that you're getting the updates that you need. The next thing we want to look at is our products. So we're pretty basic within the lab that I'm going to be using. We basically just have our core operating systems, which is going to be Windows 10. So we can see that here. Windows 7, Windows 8.1, Windows Defender for our definition updates, and then Windows Server 2016. So that's the operating systems that I'm using here. But you would just make sure that you have all the products enabled that you need to support within your environment. So this looks fine for what I'm doing. The next thing is your sync schedule. So this is how often you're going to synchronize your local WSUS catalog that your clients are going to use when they scan within the SCCM site. So I'm doing it every 1 day at 8 p.m. Now you could schedule this based on your needs. Definition updates do come out about 3 times a day. So you could possibly even go as much as every 8 hours if you wanted to stay really current with those definition updates if you're using Windows Defender. That looks good, I think, for what would be applicable for what we're going to be covering today. So I'll go ahead and click OK out of here. And the next thing I'm going to show you is the collection structure. So what I'm planning on doing for my deployments. So if we go look at our collections, we've got a couple of different things going on here. So the first group, so you can kind of tell what's going on here based on the names. So the O1, this would be the first group that updates ever target. So we can see this is going to be for workstation patches, and this is our pilot group, and it's our IT department. In this collection, I'm just using a direct rule to do this. So I just have one staging machine that I would be using for testing. Now, you could, of course, create a collection criteria. You could use like a maybe an AD security group or a OU for your testing group. Maybe you'd want to target your IT department first. In my case, it's just a single machine, and we'll go through that process of how we're going to set up our deployments later on. The second test group that I've got here is early adopters. So we've just got 2 computers within that group, and that would be kind of the second stage of testing that we would go through. And then the final one that I'm going to be using in this deployment is going to be the broad deployment. So that's going to contain pretty much all my workstations. So if I come here and look at this collection for the broad group, and we look at the rules, what we're basically doing is including all desktop and server clients. Now, what we're doing in here is filtering to the all workstations collection. So if we come and look at the all workstations, that's just going to be a collection that contains any workstation-based OS. So these are going to be my clients like Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 is what I would have here. But for this collection, I'm just using a query. I'll show you what that looks like. We're just using the discovery data from the system resource and then operating system name and version. So I'll show you what that criteria would look like in case you wanted to make it. So we've got system resource, operating system name and version, and then we're doing the operators like, and then workstation is what we're looking at, and we have the wildcards there. So this is going to pull in all my workstations, and that's going to be what this collection is based off of. And now since we're limiting that broad collection to this collection, that's where it's filtering for just those workstations, even though we have that include for all desktop and server clients. The last collection that I want to show you is the maintenance windows. So what I've got going on here is I'm going to apply a maintenance window to the production machines that I want to target. So to look at what's going on here, I want to look at the collection rules. What we're doing for this maintenance window collection, we are excluding the two testing groups because I don't want to apply a maintenance window. So a maintenance window is how we can control when patches get installed. So we can say patches would only install during this maintenance window that I define. So that can be helpful for kind of those broad deployments if you didn't want updates installing during the day and rebooting during the day. So this is what this collection is going to be used as. So we can see what we're doing is including the all workstations collection. So pretty much any workstation is going to fall into this maintenance window. Now you could of course target this on different collections based on what you might need. But in my case, I'm going to have pretty much every workstation on the same maintenance window except my testing group. So we can see that we're excluding that testing group for the O1 and the O2 testing. Now the exclude rule will take precedence over any include rule. So for example, we can see that the collection number here for the maintenance window has 5 devices. And we can see that the main workstations has 8. And then our 2 testing has 3. So that makes perfect sense because we're excluding those 3 from our maintenance window collection because we're going to want updates to basically install as soon as possible. So those 3 devices don't have to be in a maintenance window. So for the maintenance window, what I'm going to do here is create a daily window, and I'm going to say updates can install anytime from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. And for that window, so that should give me 12 hours here, we're going to do it every day. Now you can make this based on whatever you would like your machines to, whatever time frame you'd want them to install and reboot. Now for this maintenance window, I'm going to say it only applies to software updates. So for example, if you were to deploy an application and have a deadline during the day, that application would still install as long as you don't have any other maintenance windows for all deployments. So this one will only apply to software updates. So that looks good. We'll go ahead and apply that. And I think that should be all we need here as far as the collection structure, just to give you an idea of how we're going to be staging out our deployments. So the next thing we're going to look at is our client policies. So if we come over here, we can take a quick look at the default policy. So the policies that are going to be applicable to what we're doing here for updates is going to be the software updates policy. So by default, that's going to be enabled. So your client should already be getting policy from Config Manager to have them scan against your software update point. Now, if you have a GPO in place for an OWSUS server, if that GPO doesn't match the server for your software update point within SCCM, it will break scanning and you basically won't get any compliance reporting in. So if you do have an OGPO, you want to make sure that that's essentially removed or it's pointing to the exact software update point. If you only have one in your environment, you could basically target it to that. But generally, it's just best delete that GPO, and then the Config Manager client's going to set that on a local policy on the devices. The scan times every 7 days for the scanning as well as the deployment evaluation to see if any updates have changed their compliance. So that looks fine for what we're doing here. Now, scans will happen whenever you create a deployment. So just because that 7 days is there, for example, if you deployed a software update group, it's going to initiate a scan for that if it doesn't have that scan data for that. A new setting is to enable third-party software updates. So that would allow you, if you have that configured, to basically enable the local policy to get third-party updates, as well as deploy the certificate out as long as your software update point is in HTTPS mode. If it's not in HTTPS mode, you're just going to have to deploy that separately, and I'll include a link to that documentation as well in case you have to deploy the certificates and policies via GPO here. Okay, so that looks good. The only other setting here that I didn't look at that's kind of interesting is if you have software update deployments that meet a deadline and you have other software update groups where the deadline is further out, you could basically have them install all updates at once. In my case, I'm going to keep that no, just because I'm going to have Windows Defender deployments going out, and it's going to basically target pretty much every day right away. So I'm just going to keep that no for now. The next option that would be applicable to what we're doing is the restart. So by default, when a update restart is needed and it's after that deadline, once that installs, they're going to get 90 minutes here before it forces it. And then after 15 minutes, they won't be able to suppress the notification. So that looks good. We'll quickly just go over and create one custom client device setting. And what we're going to do is we're going to change the computer restart time. And we're going to make that 8 hours. So that's going to be 480 minutes. And I'll set it, I'll keep the default 15 minutes where they can't suppress it. So that looks good here. And we're going to call this 8-hour restart. Okay. And what we're going to do for this policy, we're going to go ahead and deploy that. And we're going to deploy that to our workstation patching. So the pilot group, the IT department, I'm going to target it to that collection. And then I'm also going to deploy it to my early adopters collection. So these are going to be my two target groups that I'm going to be using to deploy updates to initially for testing. The reason I'm making their restart longer is because I don't plan on using maintenance windows for these deployments, and we're going to go through that deployment process. So basically, if I did target these and the updates happen during the day, it would give them some additional time before we force the restart. Now, for my other production clients, I'm not going to target them with this because it wouldn't restart until they get into their maintenance window, which is 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. anyways. So that's, I think 90 minutes there would probably be enough since it's going to be after hours. Okay, I think that's pretty good as far as kind of the structure of things that I need to have in place before we actually go and look at my software updates. So we'll go ahead and come over to my software library. And what we've got going on here, we do already have our software update point synced, obviously. So we're going to have updates kind of flowing in here. We're going to have our compliance data from our machines. We have about 10 machines in this lab. So what I would generally do, this is a pretty clean site. The only thing that I currently have deployed is just the third-party updates that are coming through our third-party update catalog through Patch My PC. So we've got an ADR that I just didn't worry about because I'm really focusing on Microsoft updates mainly here. So what we've got is basically that clean site. We haven't deployed any type of Microsoft updates. We've only got our updates syncing. So when I would go to customer sites and kind of analyze things or do the initial setup, the way that I would generally like creating my software update groups is to kind of go back to see what's needed in the past. So what I would generally use there is just a search, and I'm going to use a saved one, and we'll kind of explain what we're doing here. So what we've got going on within this search, we're basically saying, let's find any updates. I can take deployed off here because none of these are currently deployed. And if you did want to basically reorganize for your existing site, if you wanted to go into a model similar to what we're doing in this video, you wouldn't want to filter by deployed because you might have them deployed in other update groups. So what we're looking at here, I like to kind of base it out by year for all the previous years before our current year. So it's currently 2018. So what I'm going to do is basically look for anything for the year 2017. I'm going to look where the update is required by at least one machine or more. Now, this is something that you could possibly change. The reason I like making it at least one machine, because I don't want to go through and download every single update for previous years if it's not needed. The only downside of this, you're going to want to make sure that periodically you come back here and check your search, because it's possible you could have a machine come into your site that's just completely unpatched, and maybe no machines needed that update when you originally ran this, but now that one machine might. So if you do filter by required, just keep that in mind. You might want to come back every once in a while to make sure that no new machines have come in where you might have an update that's not deployed for those previous years. I'm looking where superseded is no, we don't want to deploy a superseded update. And we've got our products for Windows 7, Windows 10, and Windows 8.1. So the way I'm going to be structuring my update groups, I'm going to be basically filtering by workstation and servers. Now, if you had different products that would be applicable to your workstations, for example, think about things like Office. So I don't have Office syncing and I don't have it in my lab. But if you have Office in here or Silverlight or any of those products that might kind of be applicable to multiple operating systems for workstations, you'd want to make sure you include those here as well. The other option that you could do here, if you want to get pretty specific, is you can also create your update groups by OS, for example. So that could slightly reduce the amount of state messages that your clients are going to be sending up to the server. So we do have a deep dive that kind of goes over scanning, client components, how state messages get sent up to the server for update compliance. But I think the key thing here, as long as you're maintaining your WSUS catalog and doing things like declining old superseded updates and languages that you don't need, I think that's going to be much more important as far as the scanning performance, as compared to having a update group by OS, for example. But you could do that if you wanted to get pretty specific, where you have like a update group for Windows 7, one for Windows 10, one for Windows 8.1, and one for Office. But in my case, since our environment's pretty clean, we're keeping up with declining those old updates and superseded things. I don't think that there would really be any type of problem as far as the slightly additional scanning that you would get and the few additional state messages that you might get by having these larger update groups. So what we would do now, so we've got pretty much any update that's needed for our workstations for 2017. For those previous years, I would like to create an update group for each of those years. So I'm going to call this Workstation Updates - 2017. And then go ahead and create that update group. Now, within my deployment packages, so when you download Microsoft updates to your SCCM site, they go into what's called a deployment package. So I structure this the same way. So I like having a different deployment package for each year. That just makes troubleshooting things kind of easier. If you have a package that's failing to distribute, you don't have a massive amount of updates if you kind of structure this for a package each year. So that's why I'm doing it here. You could use your existing packages. That would be fine. I just generally find that kind of splitting this up can help the content processing, and it's easier to troubleshoot if something was failing to distribute where you have a smaller update package. Now, if you did want to go through the process of creating an update package, you could basically right-click this update group that we just created and choose a new package. Now, in my case, what I'm doing here is just pointing out to a UNC path, just like any other update package would have. And I've just got a source location that mimics that folder structure that I've got. So, for example, this one's going to that 2017 folder. So, I think I've already got all these pre-downloaded just to save time, but that's how you could go through and create a package for each of these years. So what I'm going to do, we'll go back to our search if that's saved. It doesn't look like it. Let me just go run that again. All software updates, saved searches. And what we would essentially do now is go through and just change the dates. So we'll now go over to 2016, and then search. So it looks like we've got 51 for 2016. We'll go out and create that update group. I'm going to call it workstation updates dash 2016. Copy that. And that looks good. We'll come back to our search and go to 15. And I'll just repeat this up until I don't have any required updates for any of the years going back. So I'll go ahead and pause the video now. All right, so we are back. So within this lab, I did install an outdated Windows 8.1 and an outdated Windows 7 device, and basically just had them not patched just so we could get some real type of data in here to stage these out. So within my lab, we basically went back to year 2013, and then that's the farthest we had to go back before we had no updates required. So this looks pretty good. So this is how I would initially get started with my creation of updates here. And then for the current year, what I would do is we would use automatic deployment rules to create update groups for us for each month of the year. So the current month is June. So what I'm going to do is basically go back to my search. So where we were searching for the updates and we had that criteria for the date range, we'll come back here, and then what I'm going to do is change this to 2018. There we go. And then we're going to change this to the last day of January. Now, for the current year, one thing that I generally like to do is take out that required parameter, because for the current year, you're more likely to probably need updates for devices on probably all of the products that you might have and the classifications. So for the current year, I usually just base it off of what products do I have enabled, and that aren't. I don't base it on that required field. I'm basically deploying all those updates for the current year because it's pretty likely that your machines might need them, or if you don't have one that's required now, you might have a machine that just hasn't scanned in for that update yet. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and create that update group. And then for the current year, I like naming it 2018-01, for example. So these are going to be all the updates released in January. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And that looks good. I'm going to repeat that process for February. So we'll just search out. Now, in the future, this is just because we're kind of playing catch up because we're already midway throughout the year. The creation of the update groups for the current year, that's going to be handled by our ADRs, and we'll get that set up for the month of June. So I'm just going to go up until May here and kind of create these update groups. So I'll pause while I complete the update groups. All right, so we've completed that process. So we can currently see we've got about 5 different update groups for the previous years, and then we have 5 for updates by month for the current year. So this looks really clean when we filter by name. This is one of the things that I like, is to have your update groups named in a way that makes sense. I would often go into environments and there were basically ADRs that were just a ton of different ones named different things. So when you actually came in here and looked at the structure, you had no idea what updates were really being placed into what update groups. So I really like kind of the structure and the naming order that we're doing here for the previous years, and then the updates by month for the current year. There's a few reasons that we split out the update groups by month. It's going to make sense when we go through our ADRs, and I'll kind of explain why we do that instead of just having a single update group and have our ADR create a single update group. We'll go over that and why we want to make this monthly for the current year. So with that said, I think we're at a point where we could jump over to our ADRs and go through that process. So the first one that I'll create is going to be my Windows Defender ADR. So this is going to be Windows Defender definition updates. Definitions. That's what I'll name my my ADR. So we'll go through the process of that first, and then we'll go to our Patch Tuesdays update after that. We're going to use the built-in template for the definition update. So the definition update, we want to make sure that we add it to an existing group. The main reason for that is because Windows Defender's updates, they come out, like I said, about 3 times a day. So if we created a new update group, it would just be a massive amount of update groups that get created for that. For the collection, we're going to target all our workstations. So for definition updates, generally there's not really a need to go out and pilot them because it's just basically putting that definition update that's going to be used by Windows Defender. I would say it's probably a pretty low risk where we can just go out to everybody, and that's how I generally would stage those out. We want to make sure that we enable the deployment after this, and we'll go to the next page. In our lab, we don't have Wake on LAN enabled. There's going to be some requirements as far as forwarding traffic if you did want that enabled, but that can be a good option if you did need to wake up clients for software updates. That can definitely help you get compliance numbers up if you're only deploying updates like during maintenance windows after hours. We're going to automatically approve the license agreement, so make sure you have that enabled. And for these software updates, it's going to be pre-filled with us for the product that we want. So it used to be called Forefront. I believe now that everything's under Windows Defender. We'll leave both of those. That won't be a problem. And then for the classification, it's automatically put definition updates for us. So if we went and preview this, we would see just the different definition updates that are currently active here. So we'll just leave that default filter that's already pre-created for us since we chose that definition template. We want to make sure that we have it run after every software update point synchronization. So since the definition updates change so frequently, we want to make sure we run this after every sync. So in my lab, we saw that we were doing that every 1 day. So every night at 8 p.m. when we sync, we're also going to automatically deploy any new definition updates. For the deadline, looks like the default template placed that out an hour. Let's see if we have minutes here. Nope. So I assume the hours there just to kind of allow content to stage out to your DPs. So that might be okay to leave that. In my case, I'm going to make it as soon as possible just because this should go out really quickly where I don't have a lot of latency between my remote distribution points. So that should probably be fine here. So the available time is when the clients are actually going to see the deployment and when they're going to actually start downloading updates. The deadline is when that, once it becomes available, when do you want the deadline to be? In our case, we want these definitions to install as soon as possible. What we can see here is these are the maintenance Windows settings and the visual settings. So for definition updates, we definitely want to hide it all. These are going to be happening a lot. No need to show notifications. But one thing that's important here for definition updates, we want to get those out as soon as possible. So for the deadline behavior, we're going to tell it that we're going to allow it to install the updates outside of a maintenance window because we wouldn't want to wait till 6 p.m. every day to have to get these definition updates installed. So we're going to say we're going to go ahead and allow that definition update to install outside of that window. I think that probably looks fine. I'm not really concerned about restarts. That should never happen. I've never seen it happen for a definition update. That shouldn't be needed. The alerts, I'm not really worried about the alerts here. We'll just keep that default. We don't need to generate one here. The download settings, we're going to choose to download if they're on a slow boundary. We're going to go ahead and choose to download. And then if a clients are not on a boundary, we're going to allow them to fall back to a default boundary that's allowed for fallback or a distribution point, I mean. So that looks fine. If it's not available on any local distribution points or a fallback DP, we're going to allow it to go and download those definition updates from Windows Updates. So we'll keep that selected. You can change that based on your needs. For the deployment package, I do already have one called Defender, so I'll just go ahead and place that in my existing package, but you could go through and create a new one here if you needed to. We're going to download from the internet, and we're going to keep English here. That looks good. And then next. What we'll do to get that started, we'll go ahead and run that now, and I'll show you kind of what's happening in the background. So if we go and look at our SCCM log files, there's going to be a log called RuleEngine.log. This is going to be the log file where you can see the ADRs being processed. So we can see up here, when I kick that off at 12:06, we can see that, let me just pause this. There we go, right around here we kicked it off. So we can see it's going out and basically analyzing the criteria that you created. Any updates is going to automatically download. So we had some of the content in here, and then some of it's still being downloaded. So I'll pause it till that download completes. All right, so that ADR ran. So we can see here that it created our deployment. It added the different updates to it. One thing that I did notice, which was kind of interesting, if we go and look at our update group that created, so if we refresh this, we should have our update group for Windows Defender definitions here. So this was what was automatically created and deployed. I noticed we were getting a lot of superseded updates. So usually there's about 3 or 4 superseded updates where this gets released so frequently. What was interesting is I don't know why they wouldn't have excluded superseded updates in the Windows Defender or the definition template, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't come in here and add that just so we don't have to download those superseded updates, since there's always going to be that active one. So if we come in here and say superseded equals no, and then we do a preview, it should eliminate all those old superseded updates. So I'll go ahead and apply this. We'll rerun this. And we'll look at that rule engine, and this should kick in here, and we shouldn't have to re-download anything just because we should already have that. So it looks like it's already done. So if we come and refresh our update group, what we can see now is we're all green. That means that there's no old superseded updates. So I think this looks good. I can't think of any technical reason why we would want to deploy a superseded update and why that's the default option in that template. If you think of anything or find any documentation about why superseded isn't knowing that, just leave a comment and I'll be sure to update that. But I don't see any issue with why we couldn't just deploy the current active definition update. Okay, so before we go through the ADR to deploy our workstation updates for the current month and when we set those deployments going forward, what I'm going to do is go ahead and get these deployments for the previous year sent out to my clients. So we'll go ahead and choose deploy. And I'm going to just name this workstation updates, basically copy that update group name. But at the end of that, I'm going to append -broad. So since these updates are old, they've been validated, any type of update issues at this point should have been revised if there was some type of problem. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and start deploying these older updates directly to my broad collection. Now, it's likely that there's probably most of your machines shouldn't need these, but if you still wanted to go through a testing phase, we could certainly target the pilot groups first if you felt comfortable with that. But since these are old updates already validated, we're going to go ahead and just go directly to that broad collection. What I'm going to do is make the deadline as soon as possible. Since these are all old updates in the past, these machines should have already got these updates as long as you had them kind of deployed before. Now, one thing here for my broad collection, we're going to have it so it doesn't allow the installation and restart to happen outside of the maintenance window. So even though we set the deadline as soon as possible, these updates would only install in our broad collection between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. because that's the maintenance window we defined for those machines. So that looks good. If it's on a slow boundary, we'll go ahead and choose to install it anyways. Optionally, depending on what you want here, you can allow it to fall back to Microsoft updates if it can't find it on a local DP. What I'm going to do is name this workstation update. I'm going to save this as a template. And I'm going to call it workstation updates. I'll just call it workstation updates. So I'll remove that and save that. And then choose next here and then deploy. So what we'll do now, we'll go through all the previous years and months and choose deploy. But this time what we can do is choose that template. So I'm still going to give it the name. And I'll name it -broad. And then we'll use our save template for workstation updates. So this is going to pre-fill in our collection that we saved. It's going to make the required. The only thing that you might have to change here is the deadline. It still puts it a week out. So we'll just change that to as soon as possible, just like our old one. Same thing with maintenance windows. Now, one thing that I didn't do in that previous deployment is if you don't want the users to see any type of notifications, you could configure it to only show in Software Center. So if they directly open Software Center, they could basically install this before the deadline if you wanted. Or you could show the notification where they would get a balloon notification saying, hey, you need updates, if they wanted to install them before that maintenance window opens up. So I'll just leave this where they get that notification. And then we'll just go through all these settings, should be the same. So I'll pause the video and we'll basically go through and deploy this for all the previous years as well as the previous months, just to make sure we have those targeted. All right, so we've got all our update groups deployed. So we can see all these workstation ones for the previous years, as well as the months for the current year. We can see that in the deployed column, we've got those all sent out to our machine. So this looks good. So for the current month of June, we'll kind of go through what an ADR would look like and how we can stage that out to our collections for testing. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new ADR. I'm going to name it Workstation Updates, just like my other groupings. Now for the template here, we're going to choose to do a Patch Tuesday template. So when we click Patch Tuesday, we can see that it switched that over to create a new software update group each time this runs. So I will kind of explain why I generally like to do that for my monthly kind of workstation updates. The main reason there is if you keep adding this to an existing update group, when your automatic deployment rule runs, so let's say, for example, it runs Patch Tuesday. So in our case, this was June 11th. And let's say that we send it out to our test collection right away, and then we stage it out for our staging collection 3 days later. And then let's say we maybe go to our broad collection, say 7 days or maybe even 14 days, just for that testing cycle. What would happen if you recreate and add it to if you add it to an existing group each time this runs? It would basically reset all your deployments. So you would basically have the previous month's updates only available about half of the time, because when it runs for the next month, it would reevaluate all the rules within your product selection and it would redeploy it. So I think for the typical Patch Tuesday monthly updates, that's why the template is to create a new update group. And I think it makes sense. It also makes compliance reporting a little easier because you can go and run reports based on update group, although you can also kind of filter through some different dashboards that are available, just showing you all the updates regardless of time frame. But that's why we choose to create a new update group, each time it runs. So what I'm going to do here is, for the ADR, I'm going to create my initial deployment to my pilot group. And we'll come in after we create it, and we're going to add some additional ones to kind of stage it out to our additional testing groups as well as our production group. So we'll go ahead and do next here. We're going to accept any license agreements. For the software updates, I'm going to choose the last month. So we're going to run this monthly. So we want to search for any updates released within the last month. There we go, the last 1 month. For the classifications, I'm going to go ahead and choose pretty much everything that I had that I was syncing, except upgrades. We wouldn't want those. So I think this looks good here. So we've got critical, definition, security, update rollups, and updates. So this should cover most of probably what you would be expecting for your typical operating systems, and in any applications like Office, this would cover. The next thing we're going to add is our products. So since we're only targeting workstations for this update group, we're going to go ahead and choose the workstation products that you would want to target. So for example, if you had Office and you wanted to include that in your workstation ADR, you could go ahead and select that here. But in our case, really the only thing that I've got here is my core OSs. So I've got Windows 10, Windows 7, and Windows 8.1. We'll choose OK. And we also want to add that superseded field. We want to make sure that superseded equals no. So we'll go ahead and preview that. Looks like we've got 32 different updates for Windows 7, 8, and 10 for this past month. We can see it's, if we look at the classifications, Looks like most of the cumulative updates for Windows 10 come in under security. We do have some update rollups that are for Windows 7, so good thing we had that classification enabled. And then we've just got some different updates for Windows 8.1 and Windows 7. So that looks pretty good. That looks like the criteria that I would want to use for deploying these. So we'll go ahead and choose next here. And for the schedule, so we can see that since we have it, by default, it checks every 30 days. I think that's because we chose that option in the deployment. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this to the second Tuesday. Okay, and then for the time, so we saw that our software update point was syncing at 8 p.m. Every night. So I think if we put 10 p.m. here, that should give plenty of time for our software update point to sync. So 2 hours to basically get that metadata. Usually it's much faster than that since it's just a delta sync. So this should basically pick up any new updates that come out that second patch Tuesday of the month. So this should be good criteria, I think, for what we would be doing for this ADR. Okay. And here's where we can see our software update point. So it's syncing every night at 8 p.m. So when it syncs on that second Tuesday, we should basically get any new updates, just right after 8 p.m. I would say on average, I probably see update syncs maybe take 5 minutes if we've already done our initial sync, probably for each month. So that should be fine. If you wanted to stage it out, you could maybe put this on the second Wednesday if you just wanted to make sure you had some extra time to get that metadata. The deployment time. So for our collection that we're targeting for our testing group, I'm going to make it basically as soon as possible for both of these. So they're going to get policy right away. So that deployment will be available right away, and we'll also make that deadline right away. So since this is really going to be that initial staging group for just the small group of clients, we're going to get those out right away. We're going to show all notifications, and we are going to allow things to happen outside of maintenance windows on our testing machines. Now, if we actually look back at our collection, these machines shouldn't be included in the maintenance window because we had that exclude on them. So in theory, they're not even going to be part of that 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. But just in case they were maybe in a different collection that had a maintenance window, this will just make sure even if they did have one, we're going to allow that to go to our staging group anytime. Right when this runs, they're going to start targeting. So probably, right around 10 p.m. when we set this to run, that's when they're basically going to start getting these when it deploys it. If you want to make an in-console alert, you can. I'll just leave the defaults here. So we could get an alert if we're not 90% compliant with this deployment after 7 days. My download settings, that all looks good how we want it. The deployment package, these are going to be 2018 updates since that's the year that my ADR is running in. We'll keep the defaults here and then run that. So that looks good for our ADR. Now what we're going to do, we're going to come back in here, workstation updates, and under this deployments tab here at the bottom, we can see this is the deployment that we just created that's going to our initial pilot group. So what I'm going to do here is right-click our ADR and add a new deployment. So we're going to target our second testing group, so the early adopters group. We'll target them. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it 3 days out. So I'm going to say 3 days out. So they're going to get policy right away. So that's going to allow them to scan against the updates. If it's a required deployment, they're going to pre-download the content to the cache right when this deployment happens. And then once the deadline happens after 3 days, they're going to go ahead and install that. So even if they were offline out of your network, as long as they got that initial policy, they should download those updates. So they should, in theory, be able to even do this if they were off your network when that deadline hits 3 days from now. So that looks good. For the second staging group, I'm going to go ahead and say show all notifications. So they're going to get the balloon notification saying, hey, things are happening. I'm also going to allow it to install and restart outside of a maintenance window, and they do have that 8-hour period as well that we gave them before it would actually force that restart too. One setting that I might have missed, I'm not sure if I included this in the other one, but if an update needs a restart, we're going to choose to initiate a software update scan after the restart so we can get that compliance data coming back to us faster. So that's probably not a bad option to have within your deployment. Yeah, I'm not worried about changing the alert. You can make an alert if you wanted. We're going to choose to download and allow fallback just in my lab. That's the way I'm going to set that. And then we'll choose next here. So that's going to be our second deployment. Now our final one is going to go to our production or broad. Did I choose the wrong one here? No, that looks good. So this is going to go to our broad collection. So we're going to go over here. We're going to choose our broad deployment. So this would basically be everybody, any workstation, any remaining workstation. So that looks good. We'll do next here. We'll keep the defaults here. And now for this one, we're going to make it 7 days out. So you can make this 7, you can make this whatever you wanted, 14, whatever you felt comfortable with. So since the previous deployments are going out right away to our first staging collection, and then 3 days later to kind of that next stage of more devices, you should hopefully, if there was any problems, they should be worked out probably by time you make the deadline for your production that you would go for kind of that broad deployment. So you should, probably be able to work anything out there. For the broad collection, I'm going to choose to display it in Software Center and only show the restart. So they're not going to get those balloon notifications when they initially get policy for this deployment. Now for this one, we're not going to allow anything to happen until the maintenance window. So we're going to leave both of these unchecked. So no updates would install or restart until that 6 p.m. through 6 a.m. maintenance window, until that happened. I think everything else is good. We'll go ahead and choose that option to rescan if it needs a restart. For the alerts, I'll go ahead and enable this on the production one. I'm going to say, hey, if we're not 80% compliant 7 days after the deadline, go ahead and show me an alert in my console letting me know that. I'm going to choose the download on a slow boundary and allow fallback in my lab. That's how I want it. And we'll do next and close. So now if we go ahead and run this ADR, if we come and look back at our rule engine, this is where we're going to see all those things happening. It should kick in a second. There we go. So it looks like we might have a few updates that we're downloading content for. So I'll kind of pause this while we wait for this to complete. All right. So one thing I'm noticing, we're downloading a lot of content here. I wasn't paying too much attention, but if we come in here and look at this ADR, look at that preview, what we can see here is we've got a lot of these cumulative updates for the previews. So that's not really something I'd be interested in deploying. So what we're going to do, we're going to come back into our title filter in our ADR. And what I'm going to do is add a exclude condition. So if we zoom in, if we do a dash and then preview, and then if we add that filter, click OK. And if we preview now, we can see that those preview cumulative updates for Windows 10, they're no longer showing up. So you probably want to include those. I doubt most environments would really be interested in getting the preview ones out. Maybe if you wanted to create a different ADR completely and target that to maybe a testing group, you could get kind of a preview of what's going to be coming out the following month. So that looks good. Let me apply that. It looks like our group is still downloading here, so it looks like I probably will have to wait for that to run, and then I'll go ahead and come back to the video once that's done. All right, so I decided that I would just kill the SMS executive service. So let's go back. It looks like the ADR was actually about to complete when I was recycling that. So let's see if that, okay, so it looks like it didn't run. So hopefully we don't have that update group yet for that month. Let's see. It looks like it actually did make the update group. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and basically delete this one. And we will come back into our ADR. and we will go ahead and rerun that. Okay, there we go. So it looks like it's already had all the content pre-downloaded, so it went ahead and created our update group. So we can see it created the update group. It also created a new deployment for each of those as well. So if we come back in here, refresh that, looks like that's successful. So now we've got our new ADR for the month of April. Now what I like to do, just because I'm like things to be pretty particular so they match the same way, I'm going to go ahead and rename this. And I'll just get rid of the description so it matches with what we manually created for those previous months. So this looks good. So this one, if we look, we can see this was created by our ADR. And what I want to show you is this deployments tab. So within the deployments, we're going to have all 3 of those deployments going out. So we can see our deployment to the pilot group. We can see it was deployed, just now, and the deadline is also right away. Same thing for the early adopters. So it was deployed right away, but the deadline we can see is 3 days out. And then for the workstation patching, we can see that the deadline is, we can see that it's 7 days out. So this is kind of how we could get that testing phase, but we could still have it completely automated if you wanted to create the ADRs and have it create your update groups for you. So this looks pretty good, I think, from the management side. What we'll do, let's power on a couple of machines here that are in this group. Let's see. There we go. All right, so if we look at what we have going on, we've got a few machines here. Now, since it's looks like it's about 12:45 a.m. here, so we've got one group that's in that pilot collection, so that's going to be the Windows 8 machine. And then in the stage 2, we've got, let's see. And the other collection, or I'm sorry, the other Windows 7 machine, I think it's actually in the broad one. So it's the V2 Windows 7 right here. So since it's already in the maintenance window, what's essentially going to happen here is the updates are going to install on both of these. But let's say, for example, if this was anytime after 6 a.m. and before 6 p.m., the updates wouldn't install on that one machine because it's in that maintenance window collection, which would have that set so it only installs outside of that. All right, so we're over on the Windows 8.1 machine. And let's just see if I can kind of show you some basic details of what should happen here as far as the machines getting policy and getting the deployments. Now, this isn't going to be too deep. I did do a deep dive that pretty much covers everything that is involved in the component side of things. So things like scanning, we do a deep dive into WMI. So that would be something I include in the video. But what we can see, this machine, we just started the service. It just got started up. Just to speed things along, what we'll do is a policy cycle to get this guy checking in. Okay. There we go. So we can see we're getting policy here. We'll wait for that to complete. All right, I think we've got that. So now if we open our updates deployment, we can see it looks like we've already started scanning and doing a bunch of stuff here. Let me see if I can show you what's going on. We look up at the top. Here we go. So we can see now that we got policy. It's now evaluating all these different update groups that are targeting to it. So we can see all these different assignments. These are basically our deployments for our different update groups. So this is all looking very good. If we come here and look, it looks like we're probably going ahead and downloading content here. So we'll wait for that to kick in. All right, so we can see we just got the notification here. So we've already got our updates kind of coming in and installing. There we go. Okay, it looks like we're starting to get some additional ones flowing in here through policy. We can see in the update store all these updates that are missing that are targeting it. So they're going to start flowing in. On the Windows 7 machine, we can also see that, we've got a bunch of updates starting to come in here. So this all looks really good. I think that should cover everything that I was kind of planning on. I think that should kind of cover, how you could go out, stage your collections. If you wanted to automate it, how you could go ahead and use those ADRs. Now, if you didn't want to use ADRs, if you're just not comfortable with it, you could basically go through and make those searches just like we did for the months for the current year. But I think the way we did the ADRs here can really make sense. You still have all your testing periods before things would happen, and we still have maintenance windows. So we're really controlling, when those updates would even happen on our clients. So that's all I've got today. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, anything I maybe missed, feel free to leave a comment here at YouTube or in the blog post, Reddit, wherever you're seeing this at, and I'll be happy to answer it. Thank you for watching.